Hello lovely people, how are you all doing today? I hope you're well. I'm just sitting here in my window seat trying to soak up a little bit of light. It's gone a bit cloudy, never mind. Books, yay! A couple of them, so I'm diving into the archives today again. I don't know how much more archive there is to share, but that doesn't matter because there's always new books to come. But yesterday, archives. And I still have 2 of the books from this video, which just goes to show how lovely they are. So yeah, let's dive in. But just a quick word before we do. I'm going to try and keep this one a bit shorter today. When I was pulling this footage out of the archives to share today, I was going to try and edit. I edited quite a bit of the beginning. Anyway, I was going to try and edit around the books and just have the books, just tiny bits of books. But the thing about books is they spark ideas, they spark memories, and there's a chunk in the middle of this that gets sparked in me because of the subject of the books. And if I cut it out in a way, then the final book wouldn't make sense and everything I'm talking about. So, you know what? In the end, I decided to leave it all as it is. So that wonderful thing of reading a book and having one's mind taken elsewhere, back in time, forward in time, whatever it is. So here we go. Let's just dive in and enjoy 3 gorgeous books. So I've got 3 books here. I will try to be in a nutshell, but with one of them I'm not going to be able to be. And they have a bit of a common theme of water, let's say that. So the first one is At the Pond, Swimming at the Hampstead Ladies Pond, numerous authors. This is the one I bought as part of my, treats for a tenner. I loved it. So they're short pieces and there are about 3 or 4 pieces per season. So the 4 seasons are written about. I didn't realise that at first. I thought because it starts with winter, the first 3 pieces were all about winter swimming. And I was kind of like feeling kind of sort of cold reading about it, but also thinking, wow, how invigorating. And then I kind of clocked, oh, we're doing all the seasons. They're such eclectic pieces. Some of them are written very much sort of as a sort of a diary of my sort of first trip to the pond. Others are sort of reflecting on a lifetime of going to the ponds to swim. One of the pieces is written by one of the lifeguards, so it's her perspective of the ponds. There's some sort of sadness in there. There's some kind of challenging concepts in there. I won't give too much away. So yeah, they're incredibly eclectic, but there's this wonderful, beautiful thread through all of it. Firstly, obviously, that joy of slipping one's body into water, that gorgeous lapping over our skin and the sort of almost that sort of silky embrace of water. That's an obvious theme throughout the whole thing. But also there's that theme of the fact that it is the women's only pond, and obviously all the pieces are written by women, therefore, a sense of it being a sanctuary, a place of feeling completely safe to, I suppose a lot of it is possibly grounded in, say, body image, that sort of thing. But there, I mean, since the late 70s or so, there is a meadow next to the pond. It's all kind of enclosed by shrubbery and trees, and from the outside you can't see in. So the sort of the meadow where you can sit after a swim and read a book or chat with your friends or have a picnic or whatever, they do allow the women to be topless there, and that joy of being without clothes in the air is heaven sent. I love it. I wouldn't sunbathe topless on a beach where there are people. I'm not interested in doing that. No, thank you very much. But I have, when I've been on my own, especially sort of travelling through Greece, you know, you're riding your bike along the coast, you suddenly feel really hot. There's nothing so liberating as just taking every item of clothing off and bathing. You're not allowed to bathe topless at the ponds, which is a shame, but to be able to bathe naked and then to be able to just sit on land naked to let the sun dry us is beautiful. So that's another common theme, this feeling of sanctuary, of being safe amongst other women. It's beautiful. But there's another lovely theme which pops up every now and again, which I think is really interesting, and I will no doubt reflect on some more, to do with age. Because if the pond is a little world here, and there's another world, the big, bad, scary world on the outside, we know, we see it in the media all the time, that as women age, they disappear, they become invisible. You only have to look at a night on the telly, or, a day of news headlines. We past 20 or 30, we're disappearing, we don't count anymore. And if a woman is in the newspaper who's 60, it'll be grandmother runs marathon. She's defined by her status, by the status of her reproduction over the years. She's a grandmother, she's run a marathon. How about, 65-year-old woman runs marathon? No, grandmother. So there's this sense, you all get it, you know it, you're experiencing it too. So what's lovely at the pond is it's almost in reverse, that it's the older women who are venerated. They've been swimming the pond longer than anyone else. They are the ones who've got the medal for their winter swimming, all their medals, they've swum 20, 30 winters in that pond, whereas these 20-year-old flibbity-gibbets who turn up for one swim in the middle of summer on a blazing hot day, it's those older women who've got that record of all their swims, their winter swims. They're the ones who are held in esteem, and they're the ones who are advising the younger swimmers how to approach cold water swimming, because it does take technique, and you can't just turn up in December and have a go. There's all the acclimatisation. So there's this lovely sense that the younger women are wanting and open to the advice of the older women, and the older women are happy to give it. It's lovely. It's really, really lovely. I think it's a gorgeous book. If you love wild swimming, outdoor swimming, I think you would love it. And as a kind of quietly feminist book, it's great. It's really lovely. I loved it. Oh my goodness, which order to do? Should we carry on in the order that I read them? This book, my goodness, this is the one that got my brain pinging. This is a book called Salt on Your Tongue, Women and the Sea by Charlotte Runcie. Now, weirdly enough, I bought this for my sister for Christmas. I was given this. It's actually a proof copy. So a proof copy is the last copy that the printers print before everyone's happy. It gets proofread again, and they say, yes, that's fine, we can now properly go to print. That's why it looks a bit odd, and that's why it says $14.99 on the back. It's not $14.99, that's the hardback. The paperback is $9.99. Digressing. It's not the book I was expecting, but I loved it anyway. And I bought it for my sister, and having read it, I was like, I messaged her and said, I don't know if you'll like it, I'm not sure. I thought it was going to be all about her going for walks by the sea, swimming in the sea, that sort of thing. It's so much more. There's a lot of literary history in here. I'm just wondering, she must have done a literature degree. She writes for newspapers. I think she must have read literature at university. We begin with so much Homer. Of course, there's a lot of talk about Homer with the Odyssey being his 20-year journey home after the wars, all that time at sea. Of course, there's talk about the sirens. So the scope of the book is huge, both in terms of subject. It's everything you can imagine relating to the sea is packed in here, and the references straddle literature, classical literature, right up to more modern times. There's sea shanties, the history of sea shanties, lots of history in here. So the history of sea shanties, the history of sailing boats and women on boats, and why the women weren't on the boats. So again, it's another one with, it's a thread of, it's specifically about women and the sea. So even though there's a lot about men, it's all men at sea, sailors. Why weren't women at sea? Why weren't women sailing? So there's exploration in here. I'm going to forget, there's so much going on in it. And again, it's one of those books that's got a quiet thread underneath it. And that is that right at the beginning of the book, when she's starting to write, she discovers she's pregnant. So of course there's all those connections with the idea of this, this growing baby in its little saline world, in its world of sea inside its mother. And then of course descriptions of the moon and the tides. And that was the bit of the book that I read one word, well, it's actually two words, it's hyphenated. Is it hyphenated? Doesn't matter. And oh my goodness, I just had this flood of memories and I had to put the book down. And I just lay back on the sofa, I closed my eyes, and I was seeing and remembering. And it's what I wanted to share with you today was, as you know, well, you might not know if you've not been watching for a while, I'm very lucky that firstly, I'm lucky that I had my grandparents well into my 30s, on my mum's side. Where I'm really lucky is where they lived. They lived in Dorset. They lived in an area of Dorset called Purbeck, which is very sparsely populated, beautiful. They originally lived in a little village, a quarrying village, quarrying for Purbeck stone, Portland stone, it's virtually the same, up on the chalk downs. And 2 miles away was the little town of Swanage, which I'm sure lots of you know. It's a little touristy seaside town, very English seaside town. So you can go to beaches, the touristy bit, or up and over the downs and then down the cliffs, the craggy cliffs, onto rocky platforms, if you want a wild bit of sea. So I'm really lucky that right from the age dot, we spent so much time there as children that the sea was part of our lives right from the beginning. We were taught, we learnt to swim very, very early on, but we were taught to respect the sea, the dangers of the sea, currents, all that sort of thing. So I'm really, really grateful for that. Oh, I'm about to wander off in my mind again. But the two words that got me when I was reading it, that made me put it down and just go in my head, were tide tables. Tide with a D, not time with an M. Tide tables. And I suddenly had a flashback to seeing the card with the tide tables on, propped up in the kind of like the corner near the phone, in the old snug at Greenacres, which was their home in the village. And then later on, again, by the phone, by the front door, when they'd moved down to Swanage in their later years. So I was trying to think about when I first understood about tide tables. But before I understood about tide tables I sort of went back in my mind to think back to when I was really little, to understanding about the tide at all. So I think I must have been I must have been about 5 or 6, possibly a bit smaller, when I understood that the sea went in and out. In my little head, that's what I understood. The sea goes in and in and out, in and out. I didn't know it was called the tide. It just went in and out. And I was probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 before I learnt that it was called the tide, and that there was a thing called high tide and a thing called low tide. And high tide is when the sea is right up near you. High tide is great because if it's high tide, you don't have to walk miles to get into the sea to go and have a splash and a swim and a bob about. Low tide is when the sea goes all the way out. Low tide is really exciting because low tide means you can go rock pooling. A low tide means you can go to Kimmeridge and go hunting for fossils. Low tide. Low tide means there's tons of space on the beach to play. I'm just going to put that down a second. What else does that... Oh, you know what else low tide means? Low tide means you can go with Grandad to help him dig up log worms. So you know the little worm casings we see on the beach? That's the casings from log worms. And log worms were one of his favourite things to use as bait for fishing. Get a nice trout from my grandma. So yeah, low tide. I think low tide's better than high tide. Depends what I want to do that day. Of course, rock pooling. In my mind, I can picture so clearly looking into rock pools, that world of green and purple. It's a green and purple world, isn't it? Because of the seaweed. And if you're really lucky, you might see a little bit of a blue shadow almost of a crab scuttling away, or you see the anemones opening and feeding. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, so that's high tide and low tide. And I think I was about 10 before I learnt about spring tides. There's so much to learn about the tides, aren't there? Isn't there? Aren't there? And again, I was trying to remember so the thing about spring tide is, a spring tide is when you've got a full moon, and I think people make the mistake of thinking a spring tide only happens in the spring. It doesn't. It happens all through the year. I'll talk about the spring in a minute though. And it's just when the height of the high tide and the low of the low tide, when that measurement is at its greatest. So we've got this full moon, the moon is exerting more pull than usual on the tide, so you just get a greater difference between those two measurements. Now, at the spring and autumn equinoxes, that pull is particularly strong. So where you can have these spring tides throughout the year, the spring tides at those two equinoxes are particularly obvious. Now, we used to go to my grandparents' mostly in the summer, but I'm wondering if one year we'd gone at Easter, and if Easter was early that year, because the spring equinox is around, it's 21st of March, I think. So the full moon around that time. Anyway, perhaps we were there at Easter because, and I couldn't believe my eyes, there was a spring tide that was huge. And that was the first time I learnt about spring tide, because they were still living in the village at that time, but we'd obviously come down to Swanage for the day. And we were having one of our favourite walks from this sort of... Swanage is a big, long bay, a really big, long bay. And sort of here in the middle, that's where the tourists go for the beach, for their sunbathing, and it's sandy. And as you go further and further and further along, it turns into pebbles and then boulders. But going that way goes to the old quay and the old pier and the lifeboat station. And we used to love to go for a walk up that way. Now, the old quay it's about as you're walking along, it's about a 6 foot. The quay then projects into a jetty because, of course, before the tourists arrived, before it was a seaside town for holidays, it was a working quayside. The gorgeous stone. Sorry, I'm excited. I want to be there tomorrow. The thing about this beautiful Purbeck stone that was being quarried in my grandparents' village and going back in time, and also Portland stone, which ties into my next book. So much of it was being sent to London. In fact, I read a quote once saying that there's more Portland and Purbeck stone in London than there is left in Dorset. Regent Street, think of Regent Street, that's all built from stone that would have been quarried at my grandparents. So you'd have the sailing ships, you know, come in to Swanage Quay, the jetty, be loaded up with this beautiful stone, and then they'd sail off. I don't know whether they cut through the Solent or would have gone around the Isle of Wight, but essentially they'd have sailed along the south coast of England, up around Kent, up around the top of Kent, and boop, down into the Thames estuary and all the way up the Thames to unload it in the middle of London. You know what, it suddenly occurred to me, I like that thought, I like that connection that this town that I love in Dorset ties with this town that I live in and love right now. You see, the other thing about Swanage, if you ever go there on holiday, you might have seen it already, but if you haven't and you go there again, keep a lookout for it. Because all those ships that would then sail back to Swanage to get another cargo of stone, they had to have ballast. So when you're wandering around Swanage, you will notice a lot of the bollards in the street and other ironmongery work around the town. You'll notice on it says City of London. You think, huh? It was trashed bollards and trashed metalwork from the City of London that was put in the ships as ballast. So the ships would then sail down to Swanage with their ballast, chuck the ballast out. No one wants it, it's valueless. Put the stone in and sail back to London and make Regent Street. Gosh, how did I get onto that? Oh yeah, spring tide. So as you walk along the quay, it's about a 5-6 foot drop down to the sea. And right up next to the quay side, there's sort of gentle rocks, gentle boulders, seaweed you can see down. Obviously it gets steeper and deeper the nearer you get going out on the jetty. So as you're walking along, you can look over, and when the tide's a bit lower, you can see some of the rock pools and seaweed exposed a bit for maybe 10-15 feet going out to sea. But on this one occasion, and my little brain could hardly compute it, the tide had gone so far out that the sea had disappeared. It's like, where's the sea gone? What kind of alchemy is this? The sea had gone. It wasn't there anymore. This whole magical world was suddenly exposed. Myriad rock pools, bladder rack as far as the eye could see. It was so far out, that particular tide, that we could have walked from the jetty all the way back down the quay, all the way past the Molam, and right as far back as the sort of the tourist sandy sunbathing beach. Honestly, I found it as a child. I can still remember, I can see that sight exactly and feel that feeling almost of just being incredulous that the sea had gone. It's like someone had pulled a plug. And I remember, because Grandma was with us, and she was saying, this is a really big spring tide. And I must have said, what's a spring tide? You know, thinking of bed springs or something. So it was explained to me what a spring tide was. But back to those two words, tide tables. It wasn't till, I don't know, maybe I was 12 or 13, that I mean, I'd seen these things around, but it's adult stuff. I don't need to worry my pretty little head about any of that. Yeah, I must have been sort of 12 or 13 or so when I got curious enough to say, what is this? What is this about? And I was told, you know, tide tables were explained to me. It had never occurred to me that there were 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day, because of course when I'm sleeping the whole world stops, doesn't it? Yeah, so the idea that the sea had its own clock and its own tide tables, because in my head I'd conflated it and made it like a timetable. It's the sea's own timetable. The sea is working to its own timetable. I still love that thought now. Yeah, so I really enjoyed, back to the book, I enjoyed it for where it took me in my own mind. It's that beautiful, glorious thing about books, isn't it? Every book will mean something different to everybody who reads it. You may read it and find a completely different part of it sends you into your own, world of imagination or whatever, or memories. But just those 2 words, tide tables, and yeah, glorious, gorgeous memories. There's also a very short bit at the end about the shipping forecast. And I did read a book, I don't know, 15 years or so ago, and I can't remember the name of it, and I should have researched it before I turned the camera on. But it was, I think it was called something like Travels in the Shipping Forecast. I know it was a male author, but he was travelling around each area of the shipping forecast, and it's sort of a bit of history and sea law to do with the shipping forecast. But that's towards the end of the book, and by then I'd transferred myself into bed and I was getting all snuggled down, ready to finish the book and turn my light off. And I had a little wry smile to myself, because Auntie Teapot was an avid radio listener, and she had a radio by the bedside, had a radio in the kitchen, had a radio in the living room. Every room of the house had a radio in it. She loved listening to the radio, and she was always tuned into Radio 4, which plays the shipping forecast. And when it got to the stage, I think it must have been about 2015 or so, it got to the stage when she was needing a bit more care. So I started going down for 2 days at a time. So I'd stay overnight. And it was the first night, it was so funny. It got to about 9:30 or so, 10 o'clock in the evening. She wanted to go to bed, so, off she went to bed. And at that stage, she could put herself to bed. She was fine to do all that. And I'd sit up in the living room, close the door so she's not disturbed, although she's radio's blaring, watch a bit of telly, read, whatever, and then I'd go to bed, snuggle down. But she's still got the radio on in her bedroom. And I eventually I doze off, and then I wake up and I'm listening to this shipping forecast. I'm lying there in bed with the shipping forecast blaring from Auntie Teapot's room, and I thought, she must be asleep by now. So I sort of tiptoed through to her bedroom to think, I'll turn the radio off. And as I leaned over to turn it off, she immediately, eyes open, What are you doing? I was listening to that. It's like, oh, sorry, were you? I'm so sorry, I thought you were asleep. Pretty sure she was asleep. Anyway, turned it back on. And that was her habit, and that was what we both enjoyed, and I started to get used to it and enjoy it in the end too, of it's a strong association now. If I hear the shipping forecast now, I'm picturing myself in my little boat of a bed, bobbing on the sea of my bedroom at her place with the shipping forecast, lulling us both to sleep. Yeah, that's really lovely. I heard the shipping forecast quite recently, and it did make me get a little bit weepy. Not sad weepy, but just wistful. Just this sort of little image I developed in my mind of imagining Auntie Teapot and I in a little lifeboat, a raft, adrift at sea with the shipping forecast. Sweet. Anyway, so yeah, that all came out of Salt on Your Tongue, Women in the Sea. And I think I'm going to pop this in my shop because I think one of you would like to probably have a read of it. Really, really eclectic read, but wonderfully thought-provoking or memory-provoking, delicious. And finally, Esther, quick, Vivi, it's going to be a long one. Yeah, we're sharing. This beautiful, the Book of Pebbles that my sis bought me for Christmas. I knew I was going to love it. It's quite a quick one to read. So I'm going to put Salt on Your Tongue in the shop. I'm keeping my Hampstead Ponds. That's going back on the shelf because they're little shorts. They're the kind of thing that I can dip back into every now and again. Likewise, this one is staying. It's published by Thames and Hudson, which should give away because Thames and Hudson are an art publisher. Mostly visual arts, vast majority is visual arts, a little bit of the performing arts too, but visual art mainly. So this is as much an art book as the literature in the book. So it's throughout, it's illustrated by Angie Lewin's illustrations, which are beautiful. There's watercolours, woodcuts, lino cuts, lithographs, gorgeous. And it's all about pebbles. And aren't we all obsessed with pebbles? Don't we all pick up a pebble? Pardon me. I love that. I was reflecting on this as well, that when we have our collections of pebbles, don't we so often keep them in our bathroom? Maybe we feel deep down a bit guilty from taking them away from water. Anyway, so the first half of the book it's focused on pebbles in art, and specifically talking about Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth and their beautiful sculptures. And we can see, can't we? We can see how pebbles informed them initially, and Ben Nicholson. And for me, it was lovely, especially if you remember a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about sort of missing my past a bit and missing that person that I had been in that world of art. So for me, reading this was lovely because these are names and artists that I've been so familiar with and enjoyed so much over the years. So to be reading about them was beautiful. The second half of the book goes more into geography and geology and all the wonderful nerdy stuff to do with pebbles. It was an absolute treat. And then at the very end, there are two chapters. One is on the geology, different types. When I say chapters, they're sort of little paragraphs. Let me show you. Sort of, what we've got: limestone, sandstone, flint, just talking about the characteristics of the rock and how the pebble might appear to you on the beach, sort of pebble identification. And then what was really lovely is, let me find it, where's the, oh, hold on, I was trying to, the last chapter, chapter 10, some beaches, as in beaches that are good for pebble hunting. And as I read through it, I thought, there's so many. Of course, Chesil Beach in Dorset, which is where Christopher Stocks is the writer. That's where he lived for a long time at Portland. There we go, back to the Portland stone that was shipped off from Swanage to come and dress the beautiful buildings of London. So there's a list of beaches, and as I was reading through, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I know so many of these beaches. Shingle Street in Suffolk, beautiful. Chesil Beach in Dorset, of course. Some of you are going to get there before me. I'll come to Blackfriars in a second. Blakeney Point, Scarborough, Thurston in Merseyside. It's on the Wirral. I know Thurston very well from when we were kids. We go there for picnics occasionally, for a special treat like birthday. Of course, there's a chunk on Derek Jarman and his beach shack at Dungeness. But it also mentions Blackfriars, and that also ties back in with what I was saying a second ago about the Charlotte Runcie book and the ships going from Swanage to up into London. Now, you see, London ought really to be called London on Sea because the Thames is tidal. It's tidal quite a way. Where does it stop being tidal? Is it Teddington where the lock is? And Thames water, certainly, you know, further downriver, is brackish. It's a mix of salt and fresh. So he mentions a beach at Blackfriars because by the very nature of it being a tidal beach, right into the centre of town. So if you're ever visiting London and you're taking a walk on the South Bank, for instance, take a minute to stop and look at the Thames and check how high or low the tide is, because at low tide we have beaches all along the banks of the Thames, which is where folk go mudlarking, where they find lost treasures on the beaches, as well as Pebbles. When I was working as a nurse, I used to get my main bus home. The bus stop is on Waterloo Bridge, which, oh God, in the winter it was freezing cold because that cold air coming up off the river, oh, it's so chilly. In the summer it was lovely. If I'd been really hot and bothered at work, to stand on Waterloo Bridge and get the air, it was delicious. But I always, probably from that habit, developed as a child in Dorset. It doesn't matter what time of day, what time of year it is, I always look over, check out the Thames and see whether it's high or low tide. And actually from the bridge there, I can also see one of the RNLI lifeboat stations. All ties back. I was saying that walk that takes us past the quay in Swanage and it leads to the lifeboat station. London and Swanage, maybe they should be twinned. Oh, such fab books. I loved them all. And now where we are in time, since I made that video, obviously I've had my trip back to Swanage and shot all that different sort of footage, different videos while I was in Swanage. Hopefully it all now starts to make a bit more sense, or it just kind of reinforces how much I love that place and how special it is, and without a doubt how special the sea is to me. And I can't wait to get my next dip. I don't know when it will be, but I hope it will be this year again. I'm not leaving it longer than a year until the next time. Right, anyway, that's it for today. I will see you all again really soon. But in the meantime, yeah, happy reading, happy memories, happy dreaming of future dips in the sea, whatever it is. More than anything, please look after yourselves. And until the next one, cheerio.